The Luminaries. I'm David James. Welcome to The Luminaries, where guests share life experiences and their favorite music. Today's luminary is Dr. John Fowles, an internationally distinguished orthopedic surgeon, researcher, and educator. Tunisia honored him for building the finest orthopedic training facility in North Africa. He served with the international charity Care Medico in Afghanistan and in Uganda shortly after Idi Amin was toppled in 1979. Now, here in Canada, Dr. Fowles was awarded the Order of Canada for both his international work and his leadership at the Université de Montréal, where he headed its orthopedic surgery program and established a foundation for orthopedic research and education at the teaching hospital Hôtel Dieu. Dr. Fowles was born in North London, England, 84 years ago in 1936. Today, he and his wife, Kathy Lepore, a physiotherapist, live surrounded by nature in the Bolton Pass, east of Knowlton. John, the Second World War overshadowed your childhood. You were 9 when it ended in 1945. And 9 years later, Britain was emerging in the post-war period. Food rationing actually ended in 1954. You were 18 and you were off to medical school. It must have been heady days for you as you walked into the London Hospital Medical College. How did life look to you?
I was totally overawed by going to university. I spent the last 5 years in a public school, which is actually a private school, as a boarder. I hated the place. I was desperately homesick all the time I was there. An only child, I'd never been at home, never been away from home before, and suddenly I was thrust into this medieval monastic atmosphere of 364 boys all going through puberty. So the contrast at university was terrific. We were treated like adults. They were left to our own devices for learning. It was totally different, and I loved it. I loved university even more than I detested high school.
Let's listen to your first piece of music. What is it, John?
Well, I chose Morning. It's the first piece of music that I remember. My parents had a gramophone with 12-inch RPMs, 78 RPMs, 12 inches, Peer Gynt, and I loved that piece of music. So it's the first piece of music I remember. And when I was 11 or 12, a friend and he and I used to cycle out to the marshes. There are lots of marshes in Essex, little creeks. And we'd cycle out there and watch the birds. So I imagine myself, and I'd like you to imagine this as well. So when you're listening to the music, I suggest that you close your eyes and just imagine that you are standing on the marshes before dawn. It's desolate, and there are a few tweets and squawks here and there as the waders starting to wake up. And the curlew's call is very, very wistful and haunting. You can't mistake it when you hear it. And he calls across the marsh, and the eastern sky is lightening, and the sun is coming up. And just before the sun breaks the horizon, the birds stop singing. And when it breaks the horizon, they all start again, and it's wonderful. Just imagine you there.
That was Morning Mood by Edward Grieg, which, by the way, was composed as incidental music for a play written by Henrik Gibson of the same name, Peer Gynt. How did your parents feel about you going to medical school?
Oh, I think that they were very excited. My father wanted me to have a profession. When I was 15, I decided I wanted to be a surgeon. Before that, I'd wanted to be a vet. And I put a little notice on the gate, our gate, saying, "Bring your wounded birds here." They all died, of course. So I wasn't much good as a vet. So they were very thrilled when I went to medical school. My parents lived in Southend-on-Sea, which is by the Thames estuary, and I was in London, and I was a bit of a wild child, teenager at those times. So my parents moved up to London, and my father built his office in Doughty Street.
What did your parents do?
My father was an architect. My mother, she was a receptionist at a solicitor's when she met my father. And after that, I was born. And she was a stay-at-home mum, looked after me and my father and all that. We were living in London during the war. So I can't imagine what it was like for my parents never to know whether they'd see each other again or not, ever, through 5 years of war. Because we weren't bombed ourselves, but the bombs fell every damn day. And if it wasn't bombs, it was V1s and then the V2s. So,
and was your choice of medicine a function of the wartime period?
No idea. At the age of 15, I wanted to be a surgeon. I knew nothing about surgery. I thought that surgeons were surgeons. I had not the slightest idea that there were different kinds of surgeons. That's what I wanted to do. So, medical school I went to.
John, you're at medical school in London. You seem to have a great balance of extracurricular as well as scholarly studies. Which were you better at?
The extracurricular activities. I learned to paint scenery, which has helped me in later life. And it was a lot of fun. I loved putting on the stage shows. One we wrote every Christmas. We wrote ourselves a musical. It was a satire on the teachers and the dean and the this and that. It was marvellous fun. We had parties every night afterwards till 4 a.m. in the hostel for a week. I've told my grandchildren, when you were at university, they all are now, take advantage of the extracurricular activities. It's essential. It's part of your education. So I played rugby and tennis, particularly rugby. But I played in the beer league. I didn't play for anything very good. There were 7 pubs in a row opposite my hospital.
And you met your first wife?
Yes, she was a nurse at the same hospital. And she was in one of the plays, but I didn't meet her then. I met her at a party that I went to.
After 6 years of medical school, you'd been married, you had 2 children, and all of a sudden it seems, you pulled up anchor and said you were missing something.
Well, I came to Canada, and Deirdre Reed, my first wife, was just as enthusiastic as I. We came to Canada for opportunity. We came for other reasons as well, but mainly it was opportunity. I wasn't getting anywhere in England. I was trogging around. Nobody gave much of a damn whether I passed my exams or not. They just wanted a pair of hands to work in the hospital for 6 months at a time. And I thought that was not a good idea. And in the hospital, my teaching hospital, the London, they were very, very proud of the linoleum, which was Victorian. So imagine the filth and the germs underneath it. And I wanted something new. I'd been to, as an exchange student when I was 23, to Karolinska Hospital in Stockholm. And that was a new hospital. It was beautiful grounds, little streams, birch trees, rocks, grass. How could you not help but get better in such beautiful surroundings? And I wanted something modern like that.
And where did you find that?
Well, we came to Canada, to Ottawa. We looked at Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the United States, and we came to Canada. And I found a job advertised in the Lancet. So I came to a job, which was fortunate, because we had no money, with 1.5 children. And the second child was born in the Ottawa Civic Hospital. So I spent 2 years there. I decided I wanted to specialize in orthopedics, so they sent me to Toronto for 3 years, which was a terrific program. Really, really, really totally different from the English attitude. In Toronto, they cared about the residents. They had a plan for them to do everything by the time they took their exams so that they wouldn't fail. Passing, we worked very hard, but passing the exams was virtually guaranteed, and it was a good school.
When you graduated from this good school, the University of Toronto, you became a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. You were in an excellent hospital system, and you didn't turn to it for your first position. Why not?
Because I wanted to make a difference. Supposing there were 5 million people living in Ontario, and supposing there were 200 orthopedic surgeons, if I'd stayed in Toronto, I would have increased the orthopedic manpower by 0.5%. Whereas by going to Tunisia, where there was the same population, 5 million, but one orthopedic surgeon, the minute I walked off the aeroplane, the number of surgeons was doubled. And I made a difference.
Let's pursue that in a moment. Tell me about your second piece of music.
I've chosen Moonlight Sonata because it takes me back to my mother. My mother played the piano and she loved this piece of music. It's the only piece of music that I remember her playing. When I was about 15, my parents hired a tutor to teach me piano, and it very quickly became evident that I was totally disinterested in learning the piano. So my parents, being smart, stopped the tutor and decided to foster my interests, which were natural history and birds, rather than playing the piano. So I thank them for that.
Moonlight Sonata, Ludwig Beethoven, Piano Sonata number 14. John, you arrived in Tunisia. You doubled the orthopedic capabilities in the country. It must have been rather daunting to go into an area where you did not have the equipment, you did not have the facilities that you had enjoyed in Toronto.
My professor in Toronto, when I told him I was off to Tunisia, he said, "You're going to have to learn a whole new orthopedics." And he was right, because the diseases and disorders in Tunisia were similar to those that we had before the war. And of course, we didn't have the same instrumentation and the same care and attention that we had at home in Canada. But it was wonderfully exciting to meet all these new diseases. It was like living in a 19th century book on orthopedic pathology.
When you weren't working, what occupied your time?
I had a family, my wife and 2 children, and we used to go off. I had an old De Chevaux, which I'd painted yellow with green racing stripes and a big number 7 on one side and a big Union Jack on the other. It was really very smart. And it did 30 miles an hour downhill with the wind behind it if you were lucky. And the kids loved it. So we went to the beach a lot, of course. Little kids love beaches. We went to the marshes. We examined pond water and all kinds of stuff like that. I spent a lot of time with the kids. And also I played a lot of volleyball by the side of a salt lake in an orange grove. It was very romantic.
Did you miss the medical practice and the standards back in Canada?
0. I didn't miss anything in Canada.
And what drew you back or drew you to Montreal?
Because the job had finished, and a friend who'd been out.
This is about 3 years later.
Yes, I'd had a friend out for a month helping. He was at the Hotel Dieu. He said, "Well, come back to the Hotel Dieu." So I did. I didn't know what the Hotel Dieu was. I didn't know it was an adult hospital. I had no idea. I'd never heard of the University of Montreal. I'd heard of McGill, that's it. But I went there.
You had a little bit of dose of self-confidence?
No, well, you have to be a bit aggressive and self-confident to cut people up and sew them up afterwards and hope they're okay.
And in addition, this was during the 1970s and the Quiet Revolution, and I anticipate you must have been the typical Brit who only spoke English.
Oh, no, I'd learned French in Tunisia. That was very difficult. When I went to Tunisia, they spoke Arabic and French, and I spoke English. And that was it. So my very first clinic, I had 150 patients, French and Arabic, and I spoke English. So my friend who was with me then for a month, Carol Loran, he translated for me. The nurses translated the patient's Arabic into French. My friend translated the French into English for me, and we go back like that. It was quite interesting. But it took me 18 months to feel comfortable in French.
Tell us your next selection of music, number 3 on the list.
Well, I've chosen In the Mood. This started out as Tar Paper Stomp in 1930, and Glenn Miller got hold of it. And it became a very, very important piece of music, so important that it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame and inducted into the Library of Congress as being culturally significant. And when I hear it, I want to dance. No matter who's playing it, I want to dance. It's wonderful dance music.
In the Mood, Glenn Miller, 1939. John, Tunisia, was there unfinished business? Because after 3 years you're at the Hotel Dieu, you returned to North Africa.
I still had the bug, and I still wanted to make a difference. I suppose I was a bit of an idealist in a way. What I went back there for was to establish a formal teaching program. That's what I was asked to do. So we did that in 2.5 years, and then I was transferred to Afghanistan.
And then from Afghanistan, you went to what must be the hellhole of Africa at that time.
There's no hellhole. Uganda was gorgeous. It was just beautiful country.
Well, Idi Amin had just left the country a few months before you arrived. The place was not exactly thriving.
No, it wasn't thriving in any way. The coffee trees, which shouldn't be more than 8 feet high, so that people can pick the coffee, were 40 feet high. It was appalling. And sleeping sickness, which had almost been eradicated from Uganda before Idi Amin, was now rife. I saw some patients in one of the missionary hospitals in Uganda. It's a very, very sad disease to see these patients suffering that way from sleeping sickness.
How did you live? How did you get your food, your supplies?
Well, it
was there an
easy.
Infrastructure that delivered that?
We had a house which had been looted, and when I say looted, I mean they'd taken the roof, they'd taken the windows, but all the bricks around the windows, all the toilets, so everything was gone. So CARE had to rebuild that for us. And what we did was send a truck to Kenya every 2 weeks about, with orders for all the expats living around. And we'd buy the food in Kenya and bring it back. So we had food.
And how about the scenes in the streets as you were driving along? What would they look like?
There was nothing in the shops. In Kampala, zero. There was some shell damage, bomb damage. There was a body lying in the road that was bloating for several days. My kids passed it every day. There were no schools in Uganda. So my eldest daughter was in Ottawa, staying with friends and finishing high school there. My son was staying with his aunt, or he was a boarder actually, but his aunt lived in Rome, and he was at the American school finishing up his last 2 years. And little Claire, who was 13, was at a boarding school in Kenya. So it was impossible to bring up a family that way. And after a year of working in the government hospital and a missionary hospital, which was totally wonderful, we left, came back to Montreal. And I stayed in Montreal for the next 20 years.
How did leaving feel?
Very sad. I loved it there. My kids, very interested. I mean, the parks, many of the animals had been destroyed. It was sad. But we were able to take them on safari, so that they saw the big African animals before they meet their demise. It was beautiful, and it was sad. But we came back to Montreal because my kids were on the cusp of going to university, and I needed to be there and to get them together.
Let's listen to your next piece of music, number 4.
Sleepy Lagoon. I love this piece of music, especially played by Tommy Dorsey. This was, I think, made in 42. And if you listen to his trombone carefully, imagine that you're watching a stream of backlit honey pouring out of a jar of honey. Imagine that.
Sleepy Lagoon by Tommy Dorsey. John, when you moved from Africa into the teaching school at the Université de Montréal, what was the similarity?
Well, one similarity was that I continued clinical research. I had done my first clinical research project when I was a resident at the Sick Kids in Toronto and published it. And I continued doing clinical research, which is different from fundamental research. Clinical research is the examination of disorders or diseases and the treatment and the results, and whether you conclude that this is a good idea or bad idea or doesn't work or needs changing, etc., etc. And it's essential as a part of the training of residents to learn how to do at least clinical research and how to write a paper, and that makes them more able to criticize constructively other people's other people's publications, which appear in the top journals.
Now, well, on the professional side, you had continuity. There was discontinuity in the family side.
Oh, yes. Deirdre and I, after 20 years, separated, and we got divorced. And I remarried in 1987, Kathy, who's my present wife. And that year, we found by accident Marigold, which is where we live now. It was a little shack on a pond, and we fell in love with the site. We didn't even go into the house, we bought it. And when we decided to live there full time, I won't say retire, we took the shack down, we sold it, and it it now stands in another little village nearby, and we built a beautiful home right now.
You had an
that we live in.
idyllic dream. It was the year 2000. It was under construction. You and Kathy and her brother-in-law were walking along, and things became shattered.
Things shattered. That's very dramatic. We were standing on the sidewalk on the corner of Park and Milton, waiting for the traffic lights to turn green so we could cross the road. And a car ran the red light, hit a car coming across on the green light, and one of them hit us.
It was dramatic. You went into a 5-week induced coma. The doctor became a patient. What's it like to be in a coma? Is there any consciousness of what is going on?
Oh, yes, there's consciousness, all right. During that time, I had the most horrendous nightmares and hallucinations. So much so that the entire previous year of my life was changed in my perception. And I spent the next year asking relatives and friends, did you say this? And did this really happen? And so on and so forth. It was messed up, mainly by the drugs. They had to put me in coma. I don't disagree with that. But when the nurse writes resting quietly, you can be sure that the patient is not resting quietly. Inside his mind, it's turmoil.
Did you hear? Which senses are still operative even if one is in a coma?
I don't know. It depends how deep the coma is. So I had some visual senses because I had hallucinations. As soon as people left the room, the pipes and the little straps that hold the pipes on the wall started slithering down as worms and flatworms towards me. I mean, it was horrendous, just horrendous.
When you came out of the coma, did that give you a sense of reflection on life and mortality?
Oh, yes. When I was in rehab, ever since, every day I wake up, no matter what it's doing outside, it's a beautiful day because I'm awake and alive, and I don't give tuppenny cuss if it's snowing or raining or whatever it is. It's a great day. So, yes, I take each day as it comes, and each day is beautiful.
You've seen patients in trauma. You were a trauma patient. What makes the difference between survival and not survival?
Well, obviously one thing is the injuries, 2 is the treatment, and 3 is the will of the patient to survive. One nurse said to Kathy when I was in coma, he really wants to live. And I don't know how they knew that, but I did. I mean, I had something to live for. I love life. I've always loved life. I've had 3 horrendous depressions in my life, to the point of being suicidal in 2 of them. But I managed not to commit suicide. I'm glad I didn't. That was difficult. But I don't know. The will to live, I don't know. If living in Marigold, I see the will to live. Life burgeons everywhere. There's a tiny crack in a rock, and would you believe it? A little green thing pops out of it. I mean, it's amazing.
Indeed.
Life is amazing, and I don't know what life is.
John, you're in Marigold with Kathy. You're enveloped with nature, and you've taken concrete steps, as other people in the area have done, to preserve nature.
Yes, we've put our land, we put a servitude on it with the Nature Conservancy, so that it's in servitude to Singer Mountain, which is the next mountain over. And it means that we own the land, and the land still goes with the house, but nobody can build on it, nobody can build paths. I can make little footpaths, but nobody can build bridges or cut trees. other than taking the dead wood out, etc.
And your love of wildlife is reflected in the next song?
Yes. Well, I chose the next one for my kids because Flounders and Swan wrote several silly animal songs. And I chose this. My kids loved them. So I chose this about the gnu. It is pronounced gnu. G-N-U, gnu.
A year ago, last Thursday, I was strolling in the zoo when I met a man who thought he knew the lot. He was laying down the law about the habits of baboons and the number of quills a porcupine's got. So I asked him, "What's that creature there?" He answered, "Oh, it's a elk." I might have gone on thinking that was true if the animal in question hadn't put that chap to shame and remarked, "I hate a elk. I'm a gnu. I'm a gnu. I'm a gnu. The nicest work of nature in the zoo. I'm a gnu. How do you do? You really ought to know wahoo's wahoo. I'm a gnu, spelt G-N-U. I'm not a camel or a kangaroo. So let me introduce, I'm neither man or moose. Oh, gnu, 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 I'm a gnu. I had taken furnished lodgings down at Rustington-on-Sea, whence I travelled on to Ashton-under-Lyme, it was actually. And the second night I stayed there, I was wakened from a dream, which I'll tell you all about some other time. Among the hunting trophies on the wall above my bed, stuffed and mounted, was a face I thought I knew. A bison? Me. An okapi? Could it be a hearty beast? Then I seemed to hear a voice. I'm a gnu. I'm a gnu. Another gnu. I wish I could gnash my teeth at you. I'm a gnu. How do you do? You really ought to know wahoo's wahoo. I'm a gnu, spelt G-N-U. Call me bison or a copy, and I'll sue. Nor am I in the least like that dreadful hearty beast. Oh, gnu, 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 I'm a gnu. Gnu, 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 I'm a gnu. Gnu, 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 I'm a gnu.
John, you were active in the arts in medical school, and when you came down here to the Eastern Townships, you became an accomplished painter.
Well, I just continued where I left off, painting and drawing. But my father taught me to draw and paint, particularly with India ink and pen, when I was small. So I started when I was 3. So I've continued that. Since I've been at Marigold, I've produced about 550 drawings and 150 paintings. And I was a member of the Tour des Arts, which is a group of artists and artisans who open their studios for a week in the summer. So they come in through the greenhouse, they walk through the garden, Kathy's garden, which is gorgeous. They come in through the greenhouse where I hang the paintings and into the studio where I hang the drawings.
And in the background, they'll see a collection of LPs, one of which carries your next selection.
Stomping at the Savoy. I chose that because I love Ella Fitzgerald. She's a fabulous singer. She has a wonderful sense of timing. And Norman Grant said that this is the best single vocal jazz performance ever recorded. And the Savoy was not the Savoy in London, it was the Savoy in Harlem. It was a ballroom where it is said that swing started.
Savoy, the home of sweet romance. Savoy, it wins you at a glance. Savoy gives happy feet a chance to dance. Your lips so warm and soft as wine. Your eyes, they cling to mine. Your lips so divine to me. How my heart is swaying while the band is playing, never tired of romping and stomping with you at the Savoy. What joy, a perfect holiday. Savoy, where we can dance and sway. Savoy, until the break of day with you. The home of sweet romance, the wind you at a glance, gives happy feet a chance to dance at the Savoy. Your lips so warm as wine, when they cling to mine, like a clinging vine at the Savoy. How my heart is swaying while the band is playing, never tired of romping and stomping with you at Savoy. A perfect holiday, where we can dance and sway until the break of day with you at the Savoy.
Ella Fitzgerald with the Oscar Peterson Trio stomping at the Savoy and a bit of scat there. John, you had a surprise when your grandchildren would come to Marigold and you greeted them as the Crimson Pirate. What were you up to?
Well, it was terrifying. I had 4 small grandchildren, a pond, a boat, and a stream. Of course, there were pirates. And the pirates they terrorized the grandchildren every summer and every winter for 5 years. It was appalling. And there were a lot of photographs taken of it and 2 books called The Pirate Times were published. Well, not published, printed. When they were 12, I took each one separately to London with Kathy, my city. We spent a week there. We stayed in a little B&B in Bloomsbury, and at 9 a.m. every morning we hit the pavement after breakfast and getting up and dressed, and they didn't get back until 10 or 11 p.m. at night. They were tired. And we did everything. We did the museums, art galleries, Madame Tussauds, the London Eye, Greenwich, the whole thing. It was wonderful.
Introduced them to your homeland.
Yes.
And then when they were 16?
Oh, when they were 16, I made a list of 50 books which should be part of the heart of a private library. Important books, like Plato, for instance. I bought the books, some old, some new, some family heirlooms from me, and I had made for each of them a beautiful glass and cherry wood cabinet which would take the books, and these were custom designed to the interests of each child. And so they each, when they were 16, they got 10 books. So they had the 50 altogether, because Kathy has a grandchild from her first marriage. So, and I included her. So there were 50.
A lovely legacy. How did they take this in the digital age, receiving books?
Oh, they were very exciting. It's exciting, especially Eliza Ann. I wrote a book for each of them. It's the same book, which talks about why I did this and what I was doing, and why I thought books were important. And then I put a summary of each book in this little book that I wrote, and it fits in a drawer underneath their cabinet.
John, we're at the point in the program where you share your favorite piece of music. Before that, I thank you very much for sharing your life stories and your music here on The Luminaries. And a special thank you for being a good sport and working with me in this first edition of The Luminaries. Now tell us about your favorite piece of music.
Well, thank you very much, David. It may be chosen as the national anthem of England. England does not have a national anthem. God Save the Queen is the national anthem of the United Kingdom, but not of England. I'm intensely proud of being English and of being a Londoner. And after the war, 1946, King George VI wrote a letter to each school child saying that you were a part of the war, you shared in the dangers of the war, and you should share in the peace. It's very nice. It has become a tradition in the last night of the proms to end the promenade concert with Land of Hope and Glory. People dress up, they have their flags, all nations, not just England, and it's a very, very stirring piece of music.
Land of Hope and Glory with the BBC Symphony Orchestra under Colin Davis in 1969. More than 100 million people were listening to that performance on the last night of the proms in the Royal Albert Hall in London. This is the final piece of music chosen by today's luminary, Dr. John Fowles, who lives in the Bolton Pass, east of Knowlton, Lackbrome. This is The Luminaries. Technical production is by Yvon Grandin. I'm David James, and very much would like to receive your suggestions for other luminaries to invite to share their life stories and favorite music. You can reach me by email. Send your thoughts to theluminaries@cidi991.com. That's The Luminaries, CIDI991.com. I look forward to hearing from you.